Chapter 8 Where Angels Fear to Tread. Read for you by Julie Pandia. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. To find out more or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Where Angels Fear to Tread by E. M. Forster. Chapter 8 "Mad!" screamed Harriet. "Absolutely stark, staring, raving mad!" Philip judged it better not to contradict her. "What's she here for? Answer me that. What's she doing in Monteriano in August? Why isn't she in Normandy? Answer that. She won't. I can. She's come to thwart us. She's betrayed us, got hold of mother's plans. Oh, goodness, my head!" He was unwise enough to reply, "You mustn't accuse her of that. Though she is exasperating, she hasn't come here to betray us." "Then why has she come here? Answer me that." He made no answer. But fortunately his sister was too much agitated to wait for one. "Bursting in on me, crying and looking a disgusting sight, and said she has been to see the Italian. Couldn't even talk properly, pretended she had changed her opinions. What are her opinions to us?" I was very calm. I said, "Miss Abbott, I think there is a little misapprehension in this matter. My mother, Mrs. Herriton—" "Oh, goodness, my head! Of course you've failed. Don't trouble to answer. I know you've failed. Where's the baby, pray? Of course you haven't got it. Dear sweet Caroline won't let you. Oh, yes, and we're to go away at once and trouble the father no more. Those are her commands. Commands, commands!" And Harriet also burst into tears. Philip governed his temper. His sister was annoying, but quite reasonable in her indignation. Moreover, Miss Abbott had behaved even worse than she supposed. "I've not got the baby, Harriet, but at the same time I haven't exactly failed. I and Signor Carella are to have another interview this afternoon at the Caffe Garibaldi. He is perfectly reasonable and pleasant. Should you be disposed to come with me, you would find him quite willing to discuss things. He is desperately in want of money, and has no prospect of getting any. I discovered that. At the same time he has a certain affection for the child." For Philip's insight, or perhaps his opportunities, had not been equal to Miss Abbott's. Harriet would only sob and accuse her brother of insulting her. How could a lady speak to such a horrible man? That and nothing else was enough to stamp Caroline. Oh, poor Lilia! Philip drummed on the bedroom window sill. He saw no escape from the deadlock. For though he spoke cheerfully about his second interview with Gino, he felt at the bottom of his heart that it would fail. Gino was too courteous. He would not break off negotiations by sharp denial. He loved this civil, half humorous bargaining. And he loved fooling his opponent, and did it so nicely that his opponent did not mind being fooled. "Miss Abbott has behaved extraordinarily," he said at last, "but at the same time—" His sister would not hear him. She burst forth again on the madness, the interference, the intolerable duplicity of Caroline. "Harriet, you must listen. My dear, you must stop crying. I have something quite important to say." "I shall not stop crying," said she. But in time, finding that he would not speak to her, she did stop. "Remember that Miss Abbott has done us no harm. She said nothing to him about the matter. He assumes that she is working with us. I gathered that." "Well, she isn't." "Yes, but if you're careful she may be. I interpret her behaviour thus. She went to see him, honestly intending to get the child away. In the note she left me she said so, and I don't believe she'd lie." "I do." "When she got there, there was some pretty domestic scene between him and the baby, and she has got swept off in a gush of sentimentalism. Before very long, if I know anything about psychology, there will be a reaction. She'll be swept back." "I don't understand your long words. Say plainly—" "When she's swept back she'll be invaluable, for she has made quite an impression on him. He thinks her so nice with the baby. You know, she washed it for him. Disgusting!" Harriet's ejaculations were more aggravating than the rest of her, but Philip was averse to losing his temper. The access of joy that had come to him yesterday in the theatre promised to be permanent. He was more anxious than heretofore to be charitable towards the world. "If you want to carry off the baby, keep your peace with Miss Abbott, for if she chooses she can help you better than I can." "There can be no peace between me and her," said Harriet gloomily. "Did you—" "Oh, not all I wanted. She went away before I had finished speaking, just like those cowardly people, into the church." "Into Santa Deodata's?" Yes, I'm sure she needs it. Anything more unchristian. In time Philip went to the church, also leaving his sister a little calmer, and a little disposed to think over his advice. What had come over Miss Abbott? He had always thought her both stable and sincere. That conversation he had had with her last Christmas in the train to Charing Cross, that alone furnished him with a parallel. For the second time Monteriano must have turned her head. He was not angry with her, for he was quite indifferent to the outcome of their expedition. He was only extremely interested. It was now nearly midday, and the streets were clearing, but the intense heat had broken, and there was a pleasant suggestion of rain. The Piazza, with its three great attractions, the Palazzo Pubblico, the Collegiate Church, and the Caffe Garibaldi, the intellect, the soul, and the body, had never looked more charming. For a moment Philip stood in its centre, much inclined to be dreamy, and thinking how wonderful it must feel to belong to a city, however mean. He was here, however, as an emissary of civilization, and as a student of character, and after a sigh he entered Santa Deodata's to continue his mission. There had been a festa 2 days before, and the church still smelt of incense and of garlic. The little son of the sacristan was sweeping the nave, more for amusement than for cleanliness, sending great clouds of dust over the frescoes and the scattered worshippers. The sacristan himself had propped a ladder in the centre of the deluge, which fills one of the nave spandrels, and was freeing a column from its wealth of scarlet calico. Much scarlet calico also lay upon the floor, for the church can look as fine as any theatre, and the sacristan's little daughter was trying to fold it up. She was wearing a tinsel crown. The crown really belonged to St. Augustine, but it had been cut too big. It fell down over his cheeks like a collar. You never saw anything so absurd. One of the canons had unhooked it just before the festa began, and had given it to the sacristan's daughter. "Please," cried Philip, "is there an English lady here?" The man's mouth was full of tin tacks, but he nodded cheerfully towards a kneeling figure. In the midst of this confusion Miss Abbott was praying. He was not much surprised. A spiritual breakdown was quite to be expected, for though he was growing more charitable towards mankind, he was still a little jaunty, and too apt to stake out beforehand the course that would be pursued by the wounded soul. It did not surprise him, however, that she should greet him naturally, with none of the sour self-consciousness of a person who had just risen from her knees. This was indeed the spirit of Santa Deodata's, where a prayer to God is thought none the worse of because it comes next to a pleasant word to a neighbour. "I am sure that I need it," said she, and he, who had expected her to be ashamed, became confused and knew not what to reply. "I have nothing to tell you," she continued. "I have simply changed straight round. If I had planned the whole thing out, I could not have treated you worse. I can talk it over now, but please believe that I have been crying." "And please believe that I have not come to scold you," said Philip. "I know what has happened." "What?" asked Miss Abbott. Instinctively she led the way to the famous chapel, the fifth chapel on the right, wherein Giovanni da Empoli has painted the death and burial of the saint. Here they could sit out of the dust and the noise, and proceed with a discussion which promised to be important. "What might have happened to me? He had made you believe that he loved the child." "Oh, yes, he has. He will never give it up. At present it is still unsettled. It will never be settled. Perhaps not. But as I said, I know what has happened, and I am not here to scold you. But I must ask you to withdraw from the thing for the present. Harriet is furious. But she will calm down when she realizes that you have done us no harm, and will do none." "I can do no more," she said. "But I tell you plainly I have changed sides. If you do no more, that is all we want. You promise not to prejudice our cause by speaking to Signor Carella?" "Oh, certainly. I don't want to speak to him again. I shan't ever see him again." "Quite nice, wasn't he?" "Quite. Well, that's all I wanted to know. I'll go and tell Harriet of your promise, and I think things will quiet down now." But he did not move, for it was an increasing pleasure to him to be near her, and her charm was at its strongest today. He thought less of psychology and feminine reaction. The gush of sentimentalism which had carried her away had only made her more alluring. He was content to observe her beauty and to profit by the tenderness and the wisdom that dwelt within her. "Why aren't you angry with me?" she asked after a pause. "Because I understand you. All sides, I think. Harriet, Signor Carella, even my mother." "You do understand wonderfully. You are the only one of us who has a general view of the muddle." He smiled with pleasure. It was the first time she had ever praised him. His eyes rested agreeably on Santa Deodata, who was dying in